Hello and welcome to The Blueprint. I'm your host, Marley Finnegan. And before we dig in, please click like and subscribe below. No matter where you get your podcast, it helps us to reach more people. Also, consider leaving us a small donation, whether that be $1, $5, via one of the links below. It really helps us in funding the creation of this work. And it means a lot to know that you're out there and that you like us. So let's dig in.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to The Blueprint Within. I am Marley Finnegan, your host, and I'm so thrilled to be here today with Paulina Davie. She is an amazing astrologer and astrocartographer, and we were fortunate enough to meet by an astrocartography reading that I booked with her not too long ago and was really floored by the experience. So, welcome, Paulina, to The Blueprint.
Thank you so much, Marley. I'm excited to be here and share a conversation with you about astrocartography and how it could be supportive.
Amazing. And I always enjoy, I know you have kind of shifted your focus as of late in terms of the type of work you're kind of putting out into the world. At least that's what I received by way of your beautiful writing within your newsletters. And it definitely, I have a sense that things are kind of shifting and taking shape for you. So could you kind of, first of all, explain what astrocartography is and what sort of the base foundation of that is? And then really would also love to know sort of what called you to that path and how you began your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to explain more. So, astrocartography is a form of locational astrology. It's having a bit of a popular moment right now. So, you've probably seen it all over TikTok and Instagram. And astrocartography is basically based in the angularity of planets in your chart. So, to kind of decode that into English, what that means is as you travel around the world, your birth chart shifts like a dial into a relocated chart in places in the world where you have a planet conjunct your incarnation cross. So, if you have a planet conjunct your ascendant or rising, your descendant, your midheaven or your MC or your IC or nadir brings that planetary energy into the forefront of your experience. So that's sort of the basic breakdown of astrocartography. It could show you places that highlight certain themes that are baked into your chart. It is a direct reflection of your birth chart. And by knowing this, you can use your astrocartography map to seek out certain experiences.
Okay, amazing. And so I have so many questions because I also am learning on the fly during this about astrocartography. And the way that I kind of take it and understand it from you is that basically when you're born, your blueprint of the exact placement of every planet and star in the sky in that moment that you come into being essentially also makes a sort of imprint on the earth in that moment. And then from there, as you get older and your chart shifts over time, that's one way that astrocartography can work is the shifting over time, like to where the planets are in that present moment. Or is it always taken from your birth chart in terms of that singular moment, or is it both?
So, yes and no. It's a little bit more complicated, but how I think would be um, best to explain this is your birth chart is always you, and it's a snapshot of the moment in time when you came into existence on this earthly plane. So that's just one little snippet. And when we add on the layer of astrocartography, we're adding the space dimension to it. So we're moving around in space, but there is also a time component. So that's when we have things like transits, progressions, and cyclocartography. And that's another added layer. So there are multiple dimensions to how you can interpret a birth chart or your astrocartography map. It's not static, but there is a time space dimension, or sorry, there's a time dimension and there's also a space dimension. So, yes and no.
Okay, amazing. So, and you, through your newsletters, you talk about all the places that you're going that are very specific to your personal astrocartography. So, can you give a couple examples of where you have gone recently and how that's relative to your specific chart and what those experiences brought you?
Sure, yeah. Because our astrocartography maps are a direct reflection of our birth charts, although, you and I can both be on Venus lines, but because we have different Venus placements, our experience of a Venus line will be flavored by that zodiac sign and by the angle that it is sitting on. So two people can go to the same line, but have a totally different experience. Another layer to that too is whatever aspects, whatever relationships you have between different planetary bodies in your birth chart will also come to life when one or both of those planets are in angularity. So experiences will be unique to you for the most part, but there will be some universal themes, like Venus rules relationships or artistry. So those things will come to the forefront of, our minds.
So, where is your Venus? Like, what house is your Venus in specifically?
Yeah, I have Venus actually conjunct my descendant, so it is angular in my chart in the sign of Virgo, and I'm actually not too far away from my Venus Virgo descendant line, as well as my Jupiter Virgo descendant line.
Wow, amazing. And it's so funny, like I like to think I have a little bit of a baseline for astrology until I actually talk to an astrologer and I'm like blown away by the depths of which and I guess I wanted to just share that for listeners who maybe don't have a really depth of knowledge around, this really ancient study of astrology. Because my Venus is in Taurus, and I have a lot in Taurus, a lot in Sagittarius. But curious about
Mhm.
you said you're in California before we jumped on, and you said you were, and right now for everyone listening, we are in the middle of September 2025 eclipse season, which if you are not familiar with eclipse season, it's typically a wild and energetically interesting experience. Did you go to where you are in California, and can you talk about why, what that placement is for you in this moment? And did you go there specifically because of the eclipse season?
So usually I am very intentional with my travels. I will say where I am currently is home for me,
Mm.
and after a long season of travel for myself this year, I decided that I wanted to be rooted in one place for a little bit. So right now, tying up some loose ends and sorting some things out as I'm going through some interesting personal transits, specifically with health, because Saturn retrograde is coming back onto my ascendant, and that could be a time where health is very much at the forefront of our minds if Saturn is on your ascendant. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
hmm
Very interesting. And you said there was a lot of energy around the sun and the moon in your chart where you are as well. Can you talk about
Yeah,
that?
sure. Yeah. So in astrocartography, in addition to your major astrocartography lines, there are secondary lines that should absolutely be considered in any reading or interpretation, and that would be Parent lines. Parent lines are created where two major astrocartography lines cross, and that crossing is called a parent. And if you draw a line from that crossing around the world, that would be a latitude line. If you're familiar with AstroClick travel, you'll see this when you click around the map and you see crossing and then two planetary bodies listed. That is a parent line or crossing. So I'm in orb of a sun moon latitude line. And traditionally, sun can represent the father and moon can represent the mother. So a theme that can come up around the sun and moon is a theme around parenting or parentage. Also, when the sun and moon come together, it's very creative. we have two luminaries, we have two lights coming together. And when two lights come together, they want to shine, they want to create something.
Beautiful. That's so, so lovely. And I'd love to hear about sort of what called you to this work and the path and journey that you went on to both, start to learn about astrology and, really get into the depths of astrocartography.
Yeah. So, how I ended up here today was I was contemplating a move to my Pluto MC line, but if you do a quick Google search on Pluto lines, you'll find that most of the information that's available or personal accounts are very fearful and fear-mongering. And I wanted to know what I was getting myself into. And there isn't really a whole lot of freely available information on astrocartography online. So I decided if I'm going to make this big life-changing decision, that could potentially be, disastrous. I needed to know what I was getting myself into. So I did a quick Google search and I literally signed up for the first certification course that I could find. And it's really interesting because through my desire to move to my Pluto MC line, unknowingly, I was remote activating my Pluto MC line. And when we think about the energy of Pluto, which is transformation or empowerment, a big change that is unexpected, and MC or your midheaven representing your career or how you are recognized in public, the end result was that through my study of astrocartography, it gave me the courage to publicly share my practice of astrology, which up until that point had mostly been something I did privately or shared with a few close friends.
Oh my gosh, I love the full circle of that and the fact that we're like on video talking about it in this very moment. It's
Hmm.
been activated. That's amazing. Well, and that reminds me of the first blueprint that I ever recorded was exactly where my Pluto and Chiron lines meet, which you and I talked about in my my first reading, but basically, that is where I also recently moved very close to is my Pluto Chiron conjunction. So can you talk about what that means at a high level? And then, I mean, I think we both talked about I guess the risks or exactly what you're saying, I guess the intensity of what that potential holds. But would love to hear your perspective on that sort of a conjunction as an example.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pluto is depth and transformation, right? And Chiron is considered sort of like the wounded healer. Not sort of, but it is. So when those two come together, it offers the possibility of deep transformation through confronting our inner wounds or even ancestral wounds, or wounds that we didn't even realize that we were carrying. It could be also intergenerational trauma or traumas that are instinctual, that are wired into our bodies that we aren't fully cognizant of, but that have held us trapped. Pluto Chiron latitude lines, which is where you're at, are not for the faint of heart. It is not for everyone. But if you are interested in doing regenerative work or shadow work, or if you want to go into a season of intentionally engaging with this shadow side of yourself to heal through it, to work through the mud, then Pluto Chiron could be very supportive of that. But most people run from the discomfort. But
Mm.
if you choose to move into the discomfort of Pluto Chiron, the end result is a sense of empowerment because you're able to work through those storylines and wield the power of the truth and knowingness that you were able to look at that shadow side of yourself and meet yourself there and heal those wounds or address those wounds or figure out a path forward. And that's definitely not for everyone. So I tend to not recommend it. But if you are doing work that is regenerative or healing, or with a shadow, it could be really supportive.
Totally. Yeah, I think we talked about, my call to work with death and sort of be a bridge to the depths of the unseen world and our relationship to the fear of death, along with obviously inner work, shadow work, well-being work. So I think that was the thing is you definitely kind of gave a word of warning, but at the same time, we're like, because I have been doing this work for quite some time in terms of the shadow and going into the depths of myself and being really, really not like eager to face it, but very, very willing to face it because I know of what exists on the other side, but also just that the dark and the light is all a part of the experience, and it's something in which like enriches our lives if we do not have the fear overcome us, right?
Hmm.
um so in terms of like your path, were there sort of synchronous moments of your life or even from your childhood that led you to really seek out this wisdom? This, I feel like astrology is one of the most ancient practices that we have. I mean, there's a lot of ancient practices, and a lot of them have been sort of shoved under the rug by modern society and modernity. But astrology seems to have really, held out, but also is having an amazing, I feel like, resurgence. So where in your path, and did you always, I guess, from when you were a child, feel some sort of a magical draw to this realm?
Yeah, I was always a very curious child. And the earliest instance of being drawn to astrology without even my knowing, but in retrospect, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, is this show, this animated kids show called Sailor Moon. Are you familiar
Mm,
with that?
yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of the characters are, named after the planets, and they kind of their personalities represented an archetype of that planet. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. But besides that, I was always drawn to shows on the History Channel around like Egyptology or the occult or outer space and what we don't know. And so the curiosity was always there. But my first real introduction to astrology was through the book The Secret Language of Birthdays by Gary Goldschneider. Have you ever read that book?
I haven't, but it sounds fascinating. I love like birthday books.
Yeah, so it is a birthday book, and it gives an archetype for um, each day of the year, along with,
Wow.
your zodiac sign and all that. And I was obsessed. This was in middle school. It was a coffee table book at my friend's house. And slowly, my fascination with astrology grew. I would find myself in the esoteric astrology section at the library or Barnes and Noble. Then in high school and in my early 20s, it turned into late nights, looking up myself and my crush on cafe astrology, our synastry charts. Scouring the forums on the Linda Goodman website or the Elsa blog, and eventually, I would say in about 2020, I started offering astrology readings to a small circle of friends during our quarterly meetings around the solstices and equinoxes. And eventually, I grew the confidence to share astrology more publicly.
Wow. Oh my gosh, I love that story so much. And I'm curious about your astrology, like your birthday and what your, ascendant and your sun and moon are.
Yeah, so I'm a Pisces rising and a double Scorpio. I have a very
I love
stacked
that.
Scorpio stellium. So I have a propensity towards Plutonian things for sure.
Oh, totally tracks. And I'm obsessed. I feel like Pisces carries such a deep spiritual curiosity, the depths of the ocean. I'm a Pisces moon as well. And also it's interesting because I feel I'm so attracted to Scorpios very often. Like I have a couple triple Scorpio friends that, it's just that deep water and depth and transformation and like comfort too, I think with death and that experience is super, super interesting. As far as astrocartography goes, like if you could tell everyone what the most important aspects are of like understanding it, what
Hmm.
what would be sort of some really good high level things for people to like look for or to understand about either where they live or where they want to travel?
Yeah, absolutely. So high level, anywhere you have a conjunction, square, or opposition in your chart, that will come to light. That will be highlighted in your astrocartography map because they will show up as clusters. And places where you have clusters, a lot of energy. It's a very karmic place and maybe a place that your soul is called to. Um,
Can you talk about like the like squares, conjunctions, and the differences between what those mean at a high level for people?
or so mathematically, conjunctions mean that the placements are close together. So there could be a sign-based conjunction. So the planets are in the same zodiac sign. So for example, I have Sun, Moon, Mars, and Pluto all in Scorpio, so they're conjunct. A square is a 90-degree relationship and can represent an opportunity to um, merge two things that are going in different directions. There's like a tension, and you're kind of being pulled in these different ways, um, but offer a lot of opportunity for growth. Oppositions are 180-degree relationships. And what's nice about that is there's still a relationship, but we're looking at an issue from an opposite perspective. So we're looking at the same thing, but from different vantage points. So there's a richness and perspective being offered. And so there's an opportunity to grow through balancing these two different perspectives and coming out on the other side of it with a more holistic understanding of whatever that issue is or whatever those two houses are where the opposition exists.
Wow, super interesting. And then like with regard to where you're born, is that sort of your like home base of the chart? So it's almost agnostic to any of those angles or scenarios, or can you be born in a place that's like not aligned with your astrology in some way?
Hmm. Yeah, so definitely if you have some harsh fourth house placements, like say you have Uranus in the fourth house, where you were born, so it's in your natal chart, you could feel like the odd person out growing up and just you feel a sense of discomfort, like you just can't relax and feel at home in
Oh,
the place you were born. So there's that. But also because we are on this journey of growth and evolution over time, we have transits and progressions that shift placements in our chart as well. So although you could have this discomfort with, living in the place that you were born, over time, it's possible to have transits that make it more enjoyable, or you learn to lean into the energy of Uranus and um, adapt with it, grow with it, and learn to be more comfortable. But it's not quite as easy as, say, like if you have Venus in the fourth or Moon in the fourth, those are places that tend to be easier to call home. And those would look like your Venus IC lines or your Moon IC lines.
amazing. So with your personal travels, what has been sort of the most profound learning from, aligning your travel choices to your personal astrocartography?
Ooh, that's a good question. One of my most profound experiences was actually before I discovered astrocartography, but it was confirmation for me that astrocartography is legit and very much real. In 2016, I decided to go to Cambodia, which is where my parents are from. So, sort of like the motherland, the homeland. And in Cambodia, I have a Chiron MC line. So, Chiron, the wounded healer, at the top of the chart. And I basically had an identity crisis because it was a place where I had to contend with my identity, especially as a first generation Asian American in a country like the United States, which has a long history of racism. So, although I am on the West Coast in California, that most people assume California is very progressive. I grew up in a, rural agricultural area and I basically had a lot of experiences that made me feel less than because I did not fit in with the dominant culture. So, you'd hear things like go home to where, go back to where you came from. But then I'd go back to, where my parents are from. And I had a similar experience there where they're like, you're not one of us. You're an American. So it's like this interesting dichotomy where I was born, it's like, you're not one of us is the messaging. But then going back to where my parents are from, the messaging is also, you're not one of us. So, your MC could kind of be how you are received by the world. And
Mm,
so this identity crisis sort of was born out of my um, trip back to Cambodia, where I wanted to understand my roots more. I wanted to understand where I came from. And it helps me realize, like, oh, maybe I don't belong in a singular place. And instead, the whole earth is my home, the world is my home. And I have a sense of belonging that I curate within myself and in my body versus being attached to a specific country or a specific place. But
wow,
yeah.
such a beautiful shift of an experience that it sounds really challenging, and I'm sorry. But I love the way that you saw yourself as a universal being of value. No matter where you are, your value and your infinite worth is within you. And I always say, hurt people. And unfortunately, it's so prevalent. I wonder if were those pain points reflected in your astrocartography as well, or was that more a human free will scenario of people?
Yeah. So the Chiron MC line for me in my chart ran straight through Cambodia. And on top of that, I had a Chiron zenith point just outside of the village where my mother is from. So it was just quite literally right there, a pain point for
Wow.
me is this story um, that I inherited. So it's really interesting the way that astrocartography maps can kind of speak to certain stories in your life. Um,
Did you see it as ancestral, that story? Or did you see it as like
mm,
mm, sort of this mirrored experience to your experience in California?
so I think the wound is sort of a wound of belonging and a wound of being seen because my Chiron placement is in Leo, and that has to do with being
Yeah,
seen.
absolutely.
Um, And it by shifting my chart and putting Chiron at the very top, the very most visible point in my chart, it became really obvious to me, like, oh, I don't know where I belong.
Hmm.
So although the story was sort of there, it became highlighted because Chiron came into angularity. So we're shifting the dial and putting Chiron at the very top of my chart.
Yeah.
So it becomes even louder and more obvious. And it was experienced for me by how I felt like I was being perceived.
Wow. Well, and it's
Mhm.
so interesting because, hearing stories like that, you know, I always kind of think it's nothing to do with you as a person. It's like how people are feeling inside of themselves about how you, like what you represent in how they see themselves, like a projection of their own inner, you know, insecurity or not enoughness onto you when really you're just there being open and wanting to, you know, have this life experience in this unique place. So it's really it's complicated when those things can happen. And especially, were you there by yourself? Were you
Yeah.
solo? Wow.
Yeah, for Cambodia, I was solo, and it was really interesting because back when I did this, I had quite a few friends do the backpacking trail through Southeast Asia, and they were raving about their experience in Cambodia and how it was so much fun, and they partied in all these hostels and stuff. And I was like, okay, great, cool. Like, I will go do that and see for myself. But because I had this ancestral trauma there. And I had familial roots there. My experience of the space was totally different. And it was colored by the family that I came from and also Chiron on my MC.
Well, and you mentioned Chiron Zenith, and I'm curious,
hmm
I've never heard that before, but Zenith has significance to me in a different way, but I'm curious what that means.
Yeah, so on all of your MC lines, you have a zenith point. And the zenith point is the place where that planetary body is directly overhead. So you can kind of think of it as having the energy of high noon. Like when the sun is at high noon, it's the brightest, it's the strongest, it emits the most heat. So you feel it even stronger.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. It's a friend had this dream. I have a friend that we have oftentimes have dreams where we're in similar scenarios at the same in the same night, like seeing
Wow.
similar things. And
Yeah.
she had this dream about the zenith frequency, like this frequency that is, and I believe it's like the highest frequency of consciousness. I haven't really
Mm,
seen where this is going yet, but it's super interesting. And that just affirmed to me what zenith what I already thought it meant. Um, so I would love to talk about,
mm.
you know, I'm obsessed with the fact that Pluto came into Aquarius last year and is on a 20-year jaunt through Aquarius, which the way I say it, and I am no astrologer, is like Pluto is the planet of death and transformation, going into the planet or into the sign of the collective good for all. So like the death and transformation of what's not in service of the good of all. But I would love to know your perspective on the United States astrology over the coming decades and how you see, you know, what's happening in our reality as it maps onto the US astrology, if you've made those types of through lines, I guess.
Yeah, we are in very interesting times. So the United States Sibley chart, if you use the July 4th, 1776, 5:10 p.m. birth time, um, we just completed the United States Pluto return. And now we are entering the United States Uranus return. Natally, the United States has Uranus in Gemini at 8 degrees. And historically, every time Uranus is in Gemini, we are involved in some kind of big war. So the American Revolutionary War was during Uranus in Gemini, and as Pluto ingressed into Aquarius. Then the American Civil War, we had Uranus in Gemini, also similar degrees. We had it at 9 degrees, and Neptune was ingressing into Aries, which we now have Neptune in Aries. We
Mhm.
are coming into a retrograde of Neptune. So yeah, Neptune is retrograding back into the late degrees of Pisces for the last time before it'll fully ingress into Aries. So we see these like repetitions of patterns that kind of speak to a war on the horizon for the United States. My intuition says that it will be a civil war rather than us being involved in a global conflict. I know we have our fingers in very many pots all over the place, but with the way things are going, domestically, it seems that we are building up to another civil war type of situation.
It's super interesting because when you said that, and my feeling is that we are in a war, but it's a spiritual war. It's a war within. It's like a, a little bit more of a war on consciousness. And I do agree that it is a domestic war. I agree that um, it is pretty much a war of manipulation around what we see or don't see and what we believe or don't believe. And
Hmm.
I think the big thing for me, I talked about this previously, but I had this download last year, right before Christmas, about Christ consciousness. And basically, it was like, it's the second coming of Christ is happening now, and it's the awakening of Christ consciousness within humanity, which is otherwise known as unity consciousness. I don't,
Mm,
I'm not super spiritual, like in any conventional sense, and definitely not like hyper Christian, but there's been a lot around Christ consciousness coming through and unity consciousness. And I kind of feel like um, it's this seeding and awakening and watering of remembrance within our bodies that is helping us to see beyond, the media and the different types of manipulation that really
mm,
keep us separated and keep us divided and keep us in these like political polarities. So I even saw an article recently that was talking about all the ways in which we're sort of already in a war, in
hmm
terms of technocratic
hmm
advancements and, all the AI and all the different decisions being made around technologies, data center
hmm
that we like as citizens have not been a privy to or a part of. And it's it's also very plutonic, right, in nature to have all this technological and Aquarian. Um,
hmm
well, thank you. That's super interesting. And I am really, really on the side of like we're going to unify and imagine a much better future. But obviously, I think the fear narrative can feel really heavy.
Yeah, change can be scary, especially when we're used to things being a certain way. Um, yeah, it could be uncomfortable. But if you're somebody that, leans into change or goes face first into transformation, you will be sort of a beacon of light for people at this time because you will be the example of how to stay calm in the eye of the storm. But to your point that we are already in a war, I agree with you. I think we are in a cold war, and it is about our values, our intellectual values, our spiritual values. And it's interesting, there is a dialogue between Pluto and Aquarius and Uranus and Gemini, which are both in air signs. And so it forms a trine in the air signs, which is very intellectual and very social. And we're seeing a lot of people surrender their agency to think for themselves to AI and not think about the consequences of, the way that AI hallucinates, the way that AI can cause psychosis or, push people to like confirm their delusions and think that they're right because AI said so. So it's really, really interesting. We can also
Mhm.
think of Pluto as like all encompassing and very total. And so with Pluto in Aquarius in relation to Uranus and Gemini, I also see this as the surveillance state. More than ever
Mhm.
before, we are being monitored in a lot of different ways. And because a lot of our day-to-day lives require us using these apps and being online, a lot of these user agreements, we don't read them. We just want to check the box and move on. And we don't know what we're actually giving away or what we're agreeing to. And it's pervasive. And we've been doing this for years at this point. They've collected so much data on us. So it'll be really interesting. So Pluto can be a power struggle and in the sign of Aquarius, which is humanitarian and speaks to the people. there is this sense of a power struggle between the people and the powers that be, and the opportunities we have to reclaim our power and our agency as people versus this scaringly technocratic society that we're hurtling towards.
Wow, that is very thought provoking, and also a very like concise way to sort of see it. And I totally agree. I think it's, for me, the biggest hurdle we have as humanity, beyond, and it's linked to raising our consciousness, which is, having deep, deep awareness of everything we do, and the fact that everything we do is a choice. We can choose to be in fear, or we can choose to be in love. We can choose, like, and I think it's this fear, pervasive fear of many different things, including a fear of death, but the fear of being watched, the fear of being seen, the fear of there. And there's a lot of, scary things, frankly, that are happening in the world, but it's like overcoming that fear that is so essential to our freedom and our ability to unify. And I think, to your like inference earlier of having to sort of grapple with, fears of being seen, or old wounds about being worthy of being seen, which I definitely resonate with. And I think a lot of women have that sort of witch wound, if you will, around speaking out and being out in your truth, because of obviously many times and roads of persecution. But it feels different to me now, and at least I keep hearing that it's different now. We're all out here, we're speaking our truth, and we're advocating for what we believe is right, and overcoming the fear. But I guess, do you see anything astrologically in terms of fear, or in terms of control, or in terms of you know the movement towards a different type of freedom,
Mm,
you know
yeah. Well, when I was looking at the United States Sibley chart, I did notice that the US has its IC, or its nadir, at an early degree of Aries. And we have Neptune in Aries right now. I think the degree is like 3 degrees or something for the US charts. So we're going to a Neptune retrograde, but we have Neptune and Saturn conjunct in this late degrees of Pisces, early degrees of Aries, and it speaks to sort of this disillusionment around this heritage we have as a country, because we have Neptune and Saturn at this critical point in the US chart. And it seems like, the slogan, land of the free and home of the brave, it's sort of like, what does that actually mean to us? And it's this kind of reality check on the American dream, because for a lot of people, their understanding of America as a home is a place for freedom. But now we're seeing things happening to lots of different groups of people in the news that make us question, how free are we actually? And are we actually the home of the free? So it's an opportunity to kind of rethink the dream that we've been fed and gain a new understanding of what reality is.
Wow, I love that. And it also brings the question to my mind, like, is capitalism freedom? Like, is even our way of being, our systems, like, are those truly pathways to our freedom? I think the Neptune and Aries mention brings to mind almost like this, it's like a disillusion of facades, or a disillusion of constructs in which we've been fed. But I definitely have been experiencing that in my personal life having, studied degrowth and the origins of capitalism and the origins of this system in which we exist in. And I think I say the word system so often that it almost loses its meaning, but I'm talking about
Mm,
the constructs of capitalism and how they relate to equity and the perception of the appearance of equity being available to all, when really it's a
mm,
hierarchical and deeply embedded inequity at the sort of at the root of its origins to begin with, and grappling with those truths, particularly I it's so relative to like climate change. There's this great tool that just came out called Shift by Project Drawdown. And one of the first questions it asks is like, what country are you in? And then it says, you're lucky, you're in the US. Only 12% of global governments are democracies. And then you kind of think about, okay, but like how much of a real democracy is this here? And then it asks you, what is like, how much money do you make in a year? If you make over $38,000, you are in the 10% of earners in the world. And that group
wow.
of people, the group of people that make over $38,000 are responsible for 50% of global emissions. And in America, we have the highest emissions per person, and yet our geographical footprint, where we exist in, we feel the climate effects later than those that feel it first and worst, which are the ones who are the least responsible for the emissions. So it's super wild to just have this reckoning of truth, like with what has freedom really meant to us and what has it afforded us, and also, is that actually benefiting us or the world? Like our consumption practices, like, is that truly helping us, or is it actually part of our pain? So just really, really interesting insights. Do you ever struggle with knowing so much? Like, does it ever become challenging to be able to see sort of these, because I think a lot of astrologers coming into these next 20 years have been like, holy shit, this is going to be wild. Or like, there's just so much that's happening that's also never happened before astrologically, for sure, not in our lifetimes, but even like maybe historically speaking. I don't, but is it ever a lot to hold?
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I ask myself is, does this support the world that I want to create? And is this information necessary? There is so much information out there. And unfortunately, the nature of social media and the internet is this hyper sensationalization of these topical things that feel very doom and gloom that gets you the views that you're looking for. But then it's like, okay, I have this heart-shattering information, but now what? And so there's a sense of feeling dissociated from our bodies because how else do we hold onto or process the rate at which we are receiving this awful information or this news that is scary? And so I tend to not like to talk about mundane astrology and instead prefer to discuss astrology as a tool for self-healing and empowerment because I do really believe that how you show up as yourself and how you carry yourself throughout your day to day or in life is your medicine offering to the world around us. And in order to create change in the greater collective, it starts with change within yourself and change within your relationship to yourself. Um, and astrology is a very helpful tool in that journey, in that process. I think there are a lot of talented astrologers discussing the really interesting things going on in mundane astrology in the United States chart or globally as well. And it's all very interesting, but it's also like, well, what am I supposed to do with this information? How do I support the causes that I believe in? And in order to do that, you have to look at the unique gifts that your birth chart offers.
I love that. And I think personally, anytime within my astrology, within any self knowledge tool, whatever it may be, when I see a challenge, that's such an opportunity to improve, to just be better, to acknowledge we all have weaknesses, we all have strengths. So just like in opposition, everything you see can be seen through an alternative perspective. So I also think like astrology or any type of, I guess, doom scrolly type positioning of information is just, it's an opposition I'm not really interested in. For those of us that are really deeply committed to imagining a better way of being and imagining a better future, which is really
Mhm.
what these conversations are about, is like acknowledging that, like you said before, with change and chaos, there is new room created for rebirthing or birthing of something brand new that could be a million times better than the old thing. So really staying focused on that. And I want to ask you, as I do with everyone on the blueprint, like, what is your vision for the highest possibility for humanity and for the earth? Like, what do you see?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I view our experience collectively on this earth as, shoot, I'm blanking. Um,
No worries, we can edit anything.
Thank you. I think we, collectively share this experience on Earth. And we very much live in a globalized community, and it's not us versus them. It's all of us versus all of us. And so if we take the common denominator of that us versus us, it's you against yourself. And my hope is that more people wake up to their own innate power and realize that they have the power to not only change their life predicaments, but through their reclamation of inner power, they're able to inspire others to do the same. And by reclaiming self sovereignty and self agency, together we can create the world that we do want. But it requires recognizing that ability in yourself that is innate potential within all of us.
Wow. My favorite, that's like such a mic drop. Us versus them, when you boil it down, is you versus you. It's you versus you. That is absolute mic drop. I love that. Thank you. And how can people find you and, use astrocartography to best support themselves?
Yeah, I offer one-on-one consultations. You can visit my website, paulinadavie.com, to book a session. I'm also active on Instagram and TikTok at Paulina Davie. Oh, and I am now offering a astrology focused Substack called Serpentine Circular, and you can find my reading, or sorry, not my reading, my writing on Substack at Serpentine Circular.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of your writing. Super, super great. Well, thank you, Paulina, so much for being here. This was such a fruitful conversation. Thanks for illuminating us to the world of astrocartography and just the world of astrology at large.
Thank you for having me. This was lovely.
Thank you. Here, let's do that again. I always am awkward on the ending. Okay. So thank you, Paulina. Thank you so much for being here and illuminating us to this amazing world of astrocartography. We're so grateful to have you.
Thanks so much for having me, Marley. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you. Okay, awesome.
Yay.
I'm gonna
Oh,
stop.
man.